Okay, thanks for hanging around. Coming back to the Autodesk booth. It's me again, Will Harris, the Flame Family Product Manager.
That was a sneeze.
And I'm here with Joe Billington.
Good afternoon.
We're going to take you through our what's new in Flame version 2017. And really, I think you're going to see us have a deep dive into the technology of our Matchbox technology and its many incarnations over the last few years, culminating in some really cool stuff here in 2017. And that's a big part of what's new in Flame. So with that said, Joe, let's hit it.
Thanks very much. At the front of this, I just wanted to say a big thanks to all the people that have given us footage for this show. So
Oh, yeah.
Electric Theatre Collective, Rushes, NHB,
Yes.
Envy, obviously, all the other guys that have been involved. It's we couldn't build these things without them. So I think it's important that is acknowledged.
No, absolutely.
So like Will says, we're going to show you some new technology. It's kind of cool. I'm going to give you, just going to play this back so you can see one of the projects we're going to use was done by Envy in London. It's actually a campaigner project, so we're actually going to look at two of the different ones. But you get a kind of idea for what's going on.
The UK has always had an eye for design, and right now, in New Zealand, they're looking for unique linen and textile ranges. The demand is out there. You could be too. So,
really nice piece of work. It's actually quite an interesting story because the guys actually used a LiDAR scanner to scan a room. They took that information into Maya. They created a 3D model, and then the Flame guy got to use that model to make something look cool. Now, the problem that we have here is that we don't have that LiDAR scan, we don't have the 3D model. So what we're going to do is look at the way that actually we could build that from scratch inside of Flame using some of Flame's tools. But where we're going to start is kind of with this Matchbox sort of ethic. Now, back in 2012, I think it was, we brought in the concept of Matchbox, which is an open source GLSL shader language.
That's right.
And for all intents and purposes, it kind of allows us to do sort of creative and cool things. And we're just going to look at Matchbox here. And Will, why don't you sort of elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. Well, as you said, it's a GLSL shader language. What does that mean to lay people like us? It's a pixel pusher. It's a way of manipulating images very fast in the GPU and the graphics card. And really, you could start small with just effects on video images, right? The thing to point out is that there's a community of people building hundreds of these, part of our user base, and some individuals that are very prolific, building cool shaders, things to solve problems, solve technical problems, do creative tools. So whether you want rays on your image, or if you want to turn the whole thing to dots, or if you want motion blur using Stingray technology, we're going to come to that more in detail. But yeah, like there, he's turned the whole thing to dots, graphic design, treatments. That's the very tip of the iceberg of our Matchbox technology, because really where it goes from there is into the 3D world, into the brain of Flame.
Absolutely. And that's kind of what we're going to look at here, right? And what we're going to try and do is build it up conceptually. So we're going to start with the basics, where Matchbox helps us. Then we're going to move into some other bits and pieces. So if we really start quite sort of low level down here, I'm really just going to pull up an action node. Now, action is kind of like Will's saying, it's like the brain of Flame, if you like. It's where we do all our kind of most creative, kind of cool work, and it all comes together. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to build some of this stuff from scratch. So if you think about the project itself, it was kind of a room with like furniture and things in, and we don't, like I said, we don't have the information in the 3D model. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in and very quickly I'm just going to build some very primitive looking chairs. Now don't hold the design element against me too much, but you get a kind of idea for this is kind of what we're going to do. If I split these views out, you can see that this side is my chairs. I'm just going to bring in a quick light here. So we've got something to kind of light my scene. If I just zoom this up a bit. There's a couple of things we can do here. If I actually just set a couple of things like so, you can see I'm actually creating a kind of 3D chair, right, from a flat, basically what is a garbage mask plane. Now once you have something like that, you can start kind of manipulating that out using some of the other tools. So here we're going to use a little node called Replica. Now Replica, for those of you that can't work it out, replicates.
It replicates. That's a good name.
I know, it's been a long few days. Here you go. So we're basically making 3 chairs, where once I had one. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take that, we're going to copy and paste it, and we're just going to feed that back in there. And so now, for those the sharp amongst you will work out, we've actually got 2 sets of chairs. And so on and so forth, right? But you can see that very quickly. I'm just using Flame's, very creative tools just to create something,
make something from nothing.
Something from nothing, exactly.
The
So
Flame way.
where we're going to start with the Matchbox element of this is to come in. Now you saw me use it on a kind of a sort of 2D sort of
image
set
treatment.
of pixels, like an image. But what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to apply one of those Matchbox shaders to a 3D model. Okay, and the way I'm going to do that is as long as you pick the right shader. 1 second, bear with me. As long as you pick the right shader, which in this case is going to be the dots. And the reason I'm doing that is so that you can see exactly what's going on, is that we get something like this, right? So this is kind of a 2D sort of pixel shader, but it's working on a 3D model, okay? And this is kind of smart. You can see that very quickly. I can come into here. And, the beauty of the Matchbox is how quick it is, right? I can literally just scrub through here and this is texturing 3D inside a Flame very, very quickly. Right. But like I was saying, this probably isn't going to cut it in terms of the sort of depth that I want to generate. I want it to look a lot more kind of like it's been broken up and a bit more sort of like it's a particle almost. So what we'll do instead is we'll actually use another little tool in here called Atomize. And Atomize will, again, it's clues in the title, right? It's going to kind of make...
There's another one over there that says mess it up.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't press that.
I won't do that one. Exit. So in here, what we're going to do is we're going to take the geometry, and I'm just going to subdivide it. And you can see that very quickly what I'm doing is I'm actually, rather than actually texturing this, which is what I was doing with the Matchbox, really what I'm using here is I'm using some of the kind of substance to actually generate data for these little particles. So this is kind of nice. You can kind of do some kind of crazy stuff with that. If we come back into the batch, however, I want to kind of mess it up. I don't want it to be too uniform. I want it to look a little bit more kind of...
A little noisy.
Yeah, more noisy. So what we're going to use is a thing called substance noise, and this is a procedural texture generator. And all I'm doing really in here is just creating some sort of checkers. And what we're going to do is we're just going to throw in that substance noise into there. And I'm going to use it inside of here as a displacement map. So this is the kind of thing that, Flame guys and girls around the world are doing day in, day out, right? They're using the tools just to kind of sort of facilitate their imaginations, if you like. And what we're going to do here is if I come in and turn Gen on, you can see that now I can use that texture really just to kind of explode these chairs. Now, I'm not going to do it quite so much. I just want them to kind of be a little bit exploded, something like so. And you can see kind of what's happening. If we kind of zoom in on these, you can sort of see they're starting to break up quite nicely. Now, the only issue that I have here is that they also need to kind of move a little bit. Not too much, but they just need to sort of oscillate slightly. So what's quite nice is that inside of all of our textures, we have some behaviors. You have things like waves and flow and wind. I'm actually just going to turn on the oscillation option, which basically makes it do this. And then when we actually look inside our action, what we're actually going to get is this kind of nice little oscillating sort of pixel data that it looks like these chairs are being made up of particles, if you like. So this is kind of nice. But at the moment, if you remember, if we just quickly go back to the desktop and we look at kind of what the guys at MV created, you can see that actually what it is like, it's kind of a reveal, but it's all glowy and it looks all kind of cool. So we need to do the next bit of that, right? So if I come into here, we just turn the icons back on for a second. The first thing I want to do is make it glow, okay? So one of life's great things is making stuff glow. Absolutely. And if you come into here, we're going to use a little thing called a glow selective. Okay. Now this time the difference is that we're going to attach this to the camera, and this is really the first look that you guys are going to get at what we deem camera effects, right? So this is kind of the third iteration, if you like, of the Matchbox technology. Do you want to kind of?
Yeah. We've got you've seen the kind of us running the gamut here. And I really like the way Joe is just using the tools like a Flame guy, right? Just trying stuff out, auditioning, and that's really the philosophy there, where you can use Matchbox in different ways. Started off with just putting it on an image. Okay, no, that's just an image. Well, what about the texture? That's great. And then obviously the noise and the atomize. But now what we're doing is we're using our effect, but through the camera, rather like the way you put a filter on a camera. He's able to... like a physical camera, in the digital world, we're putting our filters, if you like, in front of our camera. And the exciting thing about it is that it can be volumetric. Our scene understands depth, so you can have glow that only happens in the distance or only happens in the foreground. You can have depth of field. You can have effects that are isolated in sort of hot zones in space. And that is what we call camera effects.
Absolutely. And just talking about that, if you actually come into here, so this is the glow that I've applied in 3D, we can actually come into here and we can start sort of deciding where in the scene it's going to exist. You can do that on a bunch of different levels, okay? It can be sort of high intensity or low intensity. But you can actually kind of move it through the scene, decide where that's going to be. Now, I'm doing it based on distance there, but it could be based on a whole bunch of different things. In this case, I'm going to base it on a cube, and I'm going to offset that. And then I'm just going to kind of move it through the scene. And as you move it through the scene, it's going to affect different things. So actually, if you look at this, you'll see a better kind of representation of what is going on. As I move that cube through the scene, it means that different things are being applied. So this is truly Matchbox in 3D, right? And I think that's very hard to kind of emphasize.
And I can see how you're getting towards being able to like pass a wave through the scene or
exactly.
or reveal the scene in real 3D like the final.
So the other thing I've also got here is a light box, and light box is our other part of the Matchbox technology. Yep. So this is basically casting a Matchbox shader through a light. Now what that means is it means you can cast things into a scene in 3D. So here I'm actually using fog, and as I change the amount of fog, you'll see, because I've made it black, the fog, it actually gives us a very kind of nice sort of organic reveal, if you like, of the stuff that sits in the scene, because I'm just kind of pushing it back through the sort of density of this 3D fog. Right. So this is kind of cool. If we just kind of move this on a few stages, there's a couple of little things that I've just added to this just to really show you what it's capable of. If we come into here, so this is kind of pretty much where we left the other setup. But the difference with this one is I've actually put in some other things. So inside of here, you can see I've actually attached a bunch of other things to the camera. So we've got some chromatic aberration, a blur, some twirl. Now, at the moment, you don't see that. That's because in each one of these, you'll see here I've actually attached it to be input of a G mask. So unless we have a G mask in the scene, it won't actually work. So in here, if I come in and I'm just going to add a quick ellipse G mask, and you'll see that as I add this, it'll behave initially like a G mask, where it will cut things out. If I just put in a little bit of softness on these edges, come here, you can see that, again, we're just softening off that stuff. But actually now, if I come and attach the G-mask to the camera, basically telling it to inherit those other effects, you'll see that if I hide the icons, that what happens is it starts inheriting the aberration, the blur, and the twirl. And actually, as we start moving that G-mask through the scene, you can see that now what it's basically doing, in 3 dimensions, we're actually blurring and twirling those 3D shapes.
So you could still move the camera at this point?
Absolutely. The camera is actually is sort of king here. If I come and select the camera and we move through the scene, you can see that actually, because of the nature of what the camera is doing, you can actually see, and actually if I put it over here so you can see what's actually going on, you'll see the camera here, and as I move through the scene, what's actually happening is we're getting it's actually a sort of inheriting more or less involvement in the actual camera effects.
So you're mixing the new and the old. You're taking a G-mask tool, one of the flame power tools, using it to isolate these effects creatively.
Absolutely.
And that's great.
And it's it's really cutting edge stuff, right? This is kind of things
the speed obviously is really good.
Absolutely. So this is kind of, I just wanted to show you this before we quickly move on. This is the final that we built. This is that whole technique just kind of taken to a sort of slightly greater degree. So we've actually built a 3D scene out of G masks, 3D shapes, so a couple of primitive imports, and this atomized technology. And, this is why Flame is great, because you can do this, right?
Right.
If I could just come out here for a second, I've also just attached in one of these glow selectives so that you'll be able to see in here exactly what it's achieving. So I'm actually casting this through the camera. So it's, it's something that you'll want to see kind of in context. So we switch to this live preview. But what's really nice about this is because, again, the nature of the sort of action schematic and how easy it is to kind of work with it, I can very quickly copy that, because actually if you remember in the final there was actually a couple of different colors in there, so we can actually sort of come into here. I can move the second one sort of over a bit like so, and actually what's going to happen here is I'm just going to change the color of the output, and so now you've actually got 2 of these working in context of each other. Okay, and this again, it really kind of makes a huge difference to your sort of look development, because you can try these things, give it a whirl. If it doesn't happen, you can kind of...
There's no longer really a filter in the lens. It's more like a glow effect in a hot zone in space, like in an area of the scene.
Absolutely. So what's also quite nice, we're just going to finish this this particular example just down this end. So I've put we've done the background properly. We've put her in the scene, so she's just a green screen, and we've attached a couple of things to her. Things like a little light wrap here, which is actually one of the ones made by the sort of Matchbox Logic community.
Right, yeah.
So this is one that they've made, and we can kind of turn that on and we can play around with it. It just kind of helps us sort of ease her into the scene, right?
Right.
But what's also quite nice here is if we just come down the bottom here, I've actually got a big SVG. Now SVG is just scalar vector graphics,
Yep.
scalable vector graphics,
Yep.
and what it basically means is that it's it's like a big file that we can then sort of zoom in through the camera at the back here. Now, the reason we really want to show you this is to kind of give you a heads up on exactly what is going on under the hood and why it makes this stuff easy to use, right? So I'm going to kind of let Will elaborate a little bit more on this, but it's all kind of down to these sort of outputs down here.
Yeah, in order to be able to do this, what we call post-processing, in other words, the in-camera effects, if you like, what we're doing is the different outputs that are available to you from Action for things like normals and motion vectors. We now have 3D motion vectors, shadows, are being reconsumed by Action itself to be able to attenuate or isolate effects. So, for example, a glow based on distance takes the Z depth or the Z depth pass and is able to say, okay, I want a glow in the back based on the Z depth, or a glow based on normals would then only shine and glow from the angle of the normals based on lighting. So this is what we call camera effects. I think it really shows you how it works a little bit and how it can be so fast in a live 3D scene.
Yeah, and I think that the main point about this is that these are being generated by Action, right? These aren't inputs. These aren't coming from 3D. We're creating these internally from the scene that I'm making.
Yep.
And basically what this means is that downstream, we can then utilize a whole bunch of other things to work with those. So up here, I'm actually going to use a motion blur, Stingray motion blur, and we'll come to the Stingray thing in a second. But basically what it's going to do is it's going to use those outputs, and you can see here, that's my import, and that's actually what it's going to look like. And if I really over-elaborate on this, you can see, again, that it's actually using those motion vectors downstream to actually create this stuff. And
so the motion vectors made by Action are then being used by this very fast motion blur coming from game engine technology.
Exactly. So we're going to just move this on a stage further. We're going to look at a slightly different example. But again, it's kind of very important that we sort of understand this stuff that before we move on that actually is going on under the hood, because it will make this next bit seem a lot more kind of understandable.
Yeah, we're gonna crank it up another few notches.
We are. Okay, so this is a second example of this footage, right? Oh, I've made it very small, but that's all right.
They're looking for cutting-edge advanced engineering companies from the UK to help unlock the hidden secrets of the universe. The demand is out there. You could be too.
So it's the same campaign, slightly different take on a similar kind of thing.
You've gone from chairs to the whole universe, Joe. Can you handle that?
It's a very small leap. So what I've got at the bottom here is a whole timeline. Okay, this is where we're going to start, because again, what you have to remember about Flame is it isn't just all this kind of crazy cool stuff that we can do. It also does like the workhorse stuff. It's a very much an editorial product. It does a lot of the kind of data management and wrangling and stuff. And actually, what we start with this is we actually got a timeline down the bottom here. And it allows us to do kind of cool things. We can open this up. I can select all of these points, all of these clips, and very quickly I can come into here and I can do this thing called Create Batch Group. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull up the library here so you can see exactly what it does when I do this. What it's basically going to do is ask me where I want to put it. And when I do that, you see that it creates me a shot for each one of these 10 shots in my timeline. Now, that might not seem like, a big deal,
sort of
but actually
tool, right?
it's massively efficient, because if you're doing this, on a massive long-form job and you can create your sort of batch stubs to start with from scratch, it's going to save you a long time.
Puts all the layers for your shots into a group and names them.
Absolutely.
So it's pretty sexy for an efficiency tool. Maybe not as sexy as
it's as sexy
other
as
stuff
efficiency gets, I suppose.
Right.
So what we have here is a couple of different things, right? So we got this guy. He's on our background. What we're going to start with is just by tracking him, right? We want the camera to do the things that we're expecting it to do. We're going to basically create this kind of, gyroscopic sort of event. And the way that I'm going to do that is by jumping into Action here and going into the tracker. Now, first and foremost, what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of set up some rules in here. So again, this is one of the really nice things about Flame, is really just the usability. So if I've got something like this where actually the points I want to track are going to start disappearing behind him, you have this ability to go in at the very front of this and just say, well, here's a bunch of points. Try tracking those over time so that I don't have to keep stopping and starting and worrying about what's going to go on and so on and so forth. So what this should do now is just go through and it'll just track the whole thing without me having to worry. So, go off and you'll see it'll jump when it needs to the sort of relevant bits, right? And these are the things that are really going to speed up your work as you go through the day. I mean, it's going to be, saving a few seconds here, saving a few seconds there. It's all time. It's all time with the family. So outside, what I've done very quickly is I've now got a track, okay? But what you'll notice is if we look from the top down, the track very much goes from left to right. And actually what I need it to spin around.
A bit more dynamic.
A lot more dynamic. So what we're actually going to do here is we're going to use, again, just some of the tools inside of here. So I'm actually going to go into the axis here. And I'm very quickly just going to copy and paste the data from the axis that I've just tracked into my camera, okay? And what that's going to basically do is if we look from the top down, you'll see that now this camera is now behaving like the track would, okay? What's also quite nice is you can put in a secondary level of control, so you can come into here and say, do you know what, if I can grab the axis out, like so, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make the camera look at that axis. So if I want a secondary level of control where I move the camera sort of on top of the track, if you like, I can still do that. So that's quite smart. So a couple of things. We're going to come into here. We're literally going to just jump onto the desktop and grab out the alpha channel. So in here, I want the alpha channel in there. We're just going to add this as a layer. And basically what we've done here is very quickly, we're just creating a sort of starting point for the scene. Now we don't see him initially because we have to come into here and sort of add him. And you'll see that straight away there's a slight problem in that he kind of rotates with the camera, but that's fair enough because he wasn't shot in that guise. So what we'll do is we'll just move him back like so, and very quickly now we've got him kind of in the scene, right. The camera is moving correctly. So a couple of little other things that we're going to do, and again using Matchbox to kind of help us sort out some of these problems. We've got a bit of an issue with the green screen. We've got a bit of an issue with the sort of green spill. So I'm just going to bring in a couple of Matchboxes to help me sort that out. One of the ones down here is Parallax Spread. Parallax Spread will allow me to actually clean up the edges of this. So you can see that in there, I can just come in and I can change some of those things in there. And again, you've got loads of different modes you can do with that, but it's kind of smart to do it like this. We're also going to add in a quick color correction. So again, if I just do Matchbox and color corrector, the idea with this is that we can use the color corrector really just to kind of suppress the green. So if we come back in here and we'll get him to a shot where you can really see it in his hair like so, and actually we're just going to suppress that color back like so, right? So again, this is just using Matchbox for very sort of practical things, nothing necessarily whiz bang, but just kind of these are the things that we kind of need to do. We could also obviously use that to grade him down a bit, so we might sort of, put him in the scene a bit more like that, bearing in mind he's supposed to be in space, not in sort of Tesco's or something. So you can kind of get the idea of what's going on. So what we're going to then do is we're going to come out of here. We're just going to jump this on a few stages because it's kind of, it's quite important to sort of see some of this stuff. Now, if we come into here, the first thing I sort of did in here was to make this, right? Now, it'll make a bit more sense as to what this is, but this is basically just a gradient. So you can come into here, I can add in points and I can change the way the gradient works. It's very dynamic, but again, it's really good for kind of creative sort of aspects of your work.
Just a gradient, but it's starting to look more cosmic, more like some rings.
A little bit more cosmic.
Yeah, cosmic.
Some of you might work out what I'm going to do with it. Yeah. So in here, you won't expect this though. So in here, what I've actually done is I've put it around his feet, like so. And the reason for that is that I want to actually build like a particle sort of dust field or like an asteroid field almost. And now obviously I've already done that because I only have half an hour. So I'm not gonna make you sit here and watch me do function particles, but you get the kind of idea, right? This is what happens, and bearing in mind that everything's tracked, so the particles all kind of work around him now. And again, this is what we want. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm trying to create some depth, so that when we start using some of these camera sort of effects, you'll really get a feeling for what they do. Down here, I've also made a few sort of planets and stuff, just because I had some time on my hands. And you can see that there I've utilized the rings again, okay? So it's the same kind of idea, but this is all now kind of working in sort of context. The thing about this that you have to remember is that this is all 3D, right? There's no 2.5D here. This is like we're properly working in a 3D engine. And so what that gives us are things that, you know, it means that we can create kind of real sort of senses of depth and sort of all this other kind of stuff. So with like something like that, we're just going to jump it on a couple more stages, and I'm going to look at this this next little bit here. Now, we talked a little bit about Matchbox before. Matchbox is obviously an open, it's an open sort of source shader language, and the great thing about that, it means you can write your own. So I thought, well, this demo lends itself to writing your own shader. So I thought we'd give it a go, right? The way that we decided to do it was I thought what would be nice is if we could have one that maybe made a load of sort of different sort of space nebulas or something like that.
Sort of elements for your scene, right?
Absolutely. So we built one that's like this little grid, and what we basically did is we built it into a Matchbox shader that will cycle through each of these elements whenever I want, basically. And you'll see that basically what that means, the result is if we come into here and we actually add that Matchbox into the scene, you'll see exactly what it does. So down the bottom here, let's just go grab this out, and I'll just go into here and do this. So here's my shader.
While you're doing that, let me explain that what Joe's doing is with a special kind of Matchbox, another feature where you can embed images and then use a section of that image to pull out different elements. So this could be used in interesting ways for versioning, for team logos, or perhaps head-up display graphics. Things that you want to use again and again, and with a click of the button, switch between a completely one version and another one.
Absolutely. So now, exactly like Will says, because I have all this capability in here, what I can now do is very quickly, I can just switch between those different nebulas that I was showing you, and sort of, well, I can sit with my client and say, well, what do you think? I'd probably go for maybe this one. Right, so you get the kind of an idea is that I have this Matchbox shader that will just allow me to toggle through, and it can be, like you say, it could be anything. It could be titles, it could be numbers, it could be logos, it could be anything. So again, a kind of very practical use for this sort of shader technology. So once we have something like this, I've got a couple of other things in there. I've got one of our new lens flares, which have been kind of redesigned to take into account a lot of the kind of Matchbox elements, so things like new lenses and things like that. If we actually come into there and we switch into the live preview mode, you'll see very quickly there's my lens flare and how that kind of works in context of the scene. Now, what you'll also notice is that it's starting to look a little bit more like a kind of scene, right?
Yeah, starting to glow.
It's starting to glow. Now, what we're going to do here is we're just going to take this to its kind of logical conclusion and just show you these last few bits, right? And this is where it starts getting really kind of, ethereal and interesting. So what we've actually done here is I've just built up a kind of thing that you would get in Flame a lot, right? So this is a bit of 3D, some lens flares, some particles. It's the sort of thing, you know, is being done day in, day out all around the world. But what's really nice about this is, again, if we look in the 3D mode, you can see that it's really starting to take some shape, and it's really quite smart. But actually, what if I wanted to give it a slightly more kind of, I don't know, sort of realistic kind of depth and things like that?
It's a big challenge, right? To get from a sort of a 3D scene to a finished final render.
Absolutely.
It requires physical effects, depth of field, glow, blooming, all the things that are in real life.
It's probably the problem, right? It's actually taking something from looking kind of like half decent to actually looking finished.
And it's one of the things where the game engine technology really helps us.
Absolutely. So
because you've got this, they want to solve that same problem, and it has to be fast. But of course, we don't want just the real amount of motion blur or the real amount of depth of field. We want creative control. So we want to overdrive that depth of field, overdrive that glow. Why have it right when you can have it good?
Absolutely. We don't want right, we want good. So in here, what you can see is straight away, as soon as I turn on this stingray blooming, what it does is it casts it through the camera into the scene, right? So now, I mean, I'm going to over crank this so you can see it, but you get the kind of idea is that actually